Welcome to my channel, and this is in continuation of the exam ready series which I am continuing to prep you up all students so that you keep shining. And as you all know that you need to go through the content. If you like it, please share and subscribe. Subscription is totally free, but it will go a long way in making your understanding of community medicine way better. So please join my community medicine journey. It will boost my morale as well as prep you up very well. So let's go through this. The community medicine practical, the format, as I mentioned in the previous ones also, there's a problem card, there are epidemiological exercises, statistical exercises, family study, project, viva, and all of these 40 marks, 10 marks is allotted to problem cards. So it is an important area, and this problem card actually can come from any area pertaining to your curriculum. So when you see this statement, there are several important areas of focusing. Firstly, where is the patient coming from? What is the main clinical presentation? What are the findings on examinations? So here we get three important information. One, the patient is coming from Purulia. Second, the complaint is of 7 hypopigmented anesthetic patches. And the examination finding, both the ulnar nerves are found to be thickened. So if we see these kind of picture manifested in the card, the first thing that comes in your mind is of course of leprosy. So how do you diagnose a leprosy? Firstly, that concept should be very clear in your mind, because every time leprosy related card will not read exactly like this. It may have different clinical presentation in your cards. So it is best to prep you up with understanding that can fit you in any kind of card related to leprosy with any kind of clinical presentation. So that is the objective. That is, I will be giving you one, prototype, and along with will give you the necessary backup with which you can further develop other similar kind of questions. So let's see, how do you diagnose leprosy in the first place? For that, presence of at least one of the 3 cardinal signs is important. So what are these 3 cardinal signs? Number 1, definite loss of sensation in a pale or hypopigmented or reddish skin patch. Secondly, thickened or enlarged peripheral nerve with loss of sensation and or weakness of the muscles supplied by that nerve. And thirdly, presence of acid first bacilli in a slit skin smear. So again, this leprosy diagnosis has to be classified into either paucibacillary case or a multibacillary case. Often categorizing this is a challenging issue, but usually the guideline that is followed, that is a case of leprosy with 1 to 5 skin lesions without a demonstrated presence of bacilli in a skin smear is taken as a paucibacillary case. Whereas multibacillary case has more than 5 skin lesions with nerve involvement, which may be purely neuritis or any number of skin lesion and neuritis, or with demonstrated presence of bacilli in a slit skin smear irrespective of the number of skin lesions. So it is either more than 5 skin lesions or more than 5 skin lesions with nerve involvement, or less than 5 skin lesion but with nerve involvement, or presence of acid first bacilli in a slit skin smear irrespective of the number of skin lesions. Now, the provisional diagnosis as per this diagnostic criteria set up in this particular card puts it under the category of multibacillary leprosy. So how did we deduce it? Because of the certain given conditions. What are these? Because in this particular one there are 6 hypopigmented anesthetic patches which fits the criteria of more than 5. The ulnar nerves are found to be thickened, which again fits with another criteria of multibacillary. The patient hails from Purulia, and incidentally Purulia happens to be one of the 2 leprosy endemic districts of West Bengal, Bankura being the other one. So these kind of informations, conglomerated together, they give you the provisional diagnosis of the particular problem. And how do you manage it? The early diagnosis and complete treatment with multi-drug therapy, or commonly known as MDT. This remains the key strategy for reducing the disease burden of leprosy. They usually till date the standard MDT regime for paucibacillary and multibacillary leprosy were being followed since 1982 when it was first introduced. And in this particular standard regime, what is done? In paucibacillary, a 2-drug regime is followed. In multibacillary, 3-drug regime is followed. Paucibacillary is, usually for 6 months. Initially, it was 24 months, but in 1998, it was reduced to 12 months in multibacillary leprosy based on WHO expert committee recommendation. Now, the same expert committee has, revised it recently. And as per the 2020 guidelines, the recommendation present is of uniform MDT. So earlier it was standard MDT. Now that is the recommended guideline says uniform MDT. Earlier standard MDT had 2 different regimes for paucibacillary and multibacillary. In uniform drug regime, that is the uniform MDT, the multi-drug therapy, it is revised to be all types managed with 3-drug regime. Only the duration varies. For paucibacillary it is 6 months, and for multibacillary leprosy it is for 12-month long regime. And why is this recommendation? Because it is in order to avoid missing out on the multibacillary leprosy diagnosis. And that, earlier a 2-drug regime had a different blister pack of medicines given at the healthcare delivery points, and the 3-drug regime had a different blister pack. So often the healthcare workers get confused with these, and the patients also get confused. So here a uniform single blister pack is introduced so that there is no confusion, causing much better operational convenience. Adult treatment regime for multibacillary leprosy remains rifampicin 600 mg once a month. This is often referred as the SDR, that's the single dose rifampicin. You should be familiar with this term, that is SDR, that is single dose rifampicin. This is followed with clofazimine 300 mg once a month and 50 mg every day, along with Dapsone 100 mg every day for a period of 12 months. So basically 12 blister packs of 28 days each. The standard treatment regime for adults for paucibacillary leprosy has rifampicin again 600 mg once a month, Dapsone 100 mg daily, and this is over a period of 6 months. There's basically 6 blister packs of 28 days each. But those leprosy patients who has rifampicin resistance, they need to be treated using at least 2 of the following second-line drugs. What are these second-line drugs? They are clarithromycin, minocycline, or any of the quinolone groups. Which are these quinolone? These include the ofloxacin, levofloxacin, or moxifloxacin. And this is along with clofazimine daily for 6 months, that is 300 milligram, 50 milligram daily. This is followed by, after the 6 months, clofazimine to be continued along with, instead of 2, one of the second line drugs daily for an additional 18 months. So when there is resistance to rifampicin, what happens? The drug combination changes, along with the duration also lingers much longer. To the next question. A patient complains of severe body ache with fever for 3 days with retroorbital pain. What are the danger signs you should be aware of, and how will you diagnose and manage the case? Well, as you've already guessed by now, it is a case of dengue. But there is a way of presenting your answer. So what you have to mention, that dengue is defined by a combination of more than 2 clinical findings in a febrile person who has a travel history of visiting to dengue endemic areas, preferably. And what are the clinical findings of dengue fever? It includes headache, retroorbital pain, myalgia, arthalgia, nausea, vomiting, rash, which may be macular or maculopapular in nature, with laboratory findings supportive like leukopenia, where the white blood cell count is less than 5,000 cells per cubic millimeter, along with thrombocytopenia of less than 1,50,000 cells per cubic millimeter, along with rising hematocrit. So if you look at the question, you will find that several of the clinical findings are matching with it. So now you understand the problem card given in this is matching with the criteria given as per dengue fever. But this problem card can come in different combination of features, and it may have additional features mentioned, and accordingly you may need to classify. So it is best to have a good idea about how the dengue classification goes. The dengue was in the initial days labeled as asymptomatic cases and symptomatic cases, and the symptomatic cases were again classified into undifferentiated fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, and dengue shock syndrome. But for convenience of management, World Health Organization has recently reclassified dengue, and now what we follow is the dengue fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, and in this dengue hemorrhagic fever there are 4 classifications: dengue hemorrhagic fever 1, 2, 3 and 4, and of these the dengue hemorrhagic 3 and 4, they are labeled as the dengue shock syndrome. So let's see what are the criteria based on which your diagnosis may differ. So if over and above to the criteria mentioned in this particular card, there is a mention of positive tunicate test, a hemorrhagic manifestation being there, evidence of plasma leakage mentioned, along with lab findings of leukopenia and thrombocytopenia of less than 1 lakh cells per cubic millimeter, with rising hematocrit of 20% or more, then you have to classify it as dengue hemorrhagic fever type 1. Now again, if in addition to all these there are spontaneous bleeding along with the similar lab findings, you classify it as dengue hemorrhagic fever type 2. And if along with all these there is circulatory failure as well, then it is called dengue hemorrhagic fever type 3. And in dengue hemorrhagic 4, the earlier mentioned signs and symptoms along with profound shock with almost undetectable blood pressure and pulse. So this dengue hemorrhagic 3 and 4, as I have mentioned already, are classified as dengue shock syndrome. So depending on what your card reads, what your problem card is saying to you, you check those clinical or the lab findings or whatever parameters is given and classify accordingly. and mention the management based on that. So the presence of warning sign may predict severe dengue in a patient. So you have to also see if the other warning or danger signs are mentioned in the card. It may so also read like in this particular card that mention the danger signs or the warning signs. In that case, you have to just jot down the warning signs. Don't elaborate on it. It is not needed. Just mention the jotted points because you have a very limited time in hand. Within a stipulated time period, you have to cover the problem card, the statistical exercises, as well as the epidemiological exercises. So be very precise and be very objective in your writing. So it is good to know the severe dengue also. It is defined by dengue with any of the following symptoms: that is severe plasma leakage leading to shock or fluid accumulation with respiratory distress, severe bleeding or severe organ impairment such as elevated transaminase of more than 1000 international units per liter with impaired consciousness or heart impairment. And now coming to the second part of the question, that what are the danger or warning signs? Well, it can be abdominal pain or tenderness, persistent vomiting, clinical fluid accumulation, mucosal bleeding, lethargy, restlessness, and liver enlargement. Well, coming to the most important part of diagnosis of dengue infection, where the nucleic acid amplification tests form one of the most reliable ones for dengue infection detection, followed by the antibody detection. Then there is the hemagglutinin inhibitor. Then there is ELISA for detecting the immunoglobulin G or M. Same is for the rapid tests, but the ELISA is more specific. Then is the antigen detection. The major antigens that are usually used for dengue diagnosis is the NS1 and the EM antigen. The NS1 antigen are the non-structural proteins of the dengue virus. This protein is secreted into the blood during the dengue infection, and the NS1 tests have been developed for use in serum, and these antigens are detectable during the acute phase of dengue virus infection. And interestingly, NS1 tests can be as sensitive as the molecular test during the first 7 days of symptoms. And the EM antigen is also a good test, which is the envelope membrane antigen. Besides, there are RNA detection and polymerase chain reaction, as well as virus isolations which are carried out for diagnosis of dengue. Don't go into any elaboration. I'm again reiterating, just mention few of them. Coming to the management. Recognizing that the febrile patient could have dengue, one needs to notify to the public health authorities and manage right from the early febrile phase of dengue. And recognizing the early stage of plasma leakage or critical phase is very important, because thereby you can initiate the fluid therapy at the earliest. And recognizing patients with warning signs who need to be referred for admission is also very important. And there is certain basic physical examination that needs to be carried out, like assessment of the mental state, the hydration, the hemodynamic status, if there is tachypnea or acidotic breathing, presence of pleural effusion, checking for abdominal tenderness, hepatomegaly or ascites, examining for the presence of rash and bleeding manifestations, as well as carrying out the tourniquet test. So let's look at this flow chart for an easier understanding of writing the dengue case management. Well, first the assessment, based on which you come to the presumptive diagnosis. If the patient is having a travel history of endemic area, nausea, vomiting, rash, aches, retroorbital pains, headache, and along with it tourniquet test positive, leukemia, warning signs, whatever. So all this picture scenario we will classify as we learned from the previous slides, and based on that we will progress further. And as we have already discussed, we'll check for the warning signs. If there is no warning signs, we manage as per group A management, which is the dengue fever management. which will be at the outpatient level. That is, the patient can be sent back home and managed at the OPD level. But from dengue hemorrhagic fever type 1 onwards, that is those who already have warning signs of severe dengue or coexisting conditions like pregnancy, infancy, diabetes mellitus, poor social situation, old age or renal failure, they will go into the group B and will require inpatient management. And for any patient with severe plasma leakage, with shock syndrome and severe bleeding, severe organ impairment, they will go into the dengue shock syndrome and they will be managed as per group C in the inpatient. And the particular problem card that is I'm discussing here the mentioned patient apparently belongs to group A, who may be sent home, because the group A patient are those who are able to tolerate the adequate volumes of oral fluid and pass urine at least once every 6 hours and do not have any of the warning signs, particularly when the fever subsides. And they need to be reviewed daily for disease progression, that if there is any decreasing white blood cell count, defervescence and warning signs. And these patients need to be encouraged about oral intake of ORS, fruit juice and other fluids, and give paracetamol for high fever if the patient is uncomfortable, tapered sponging, acetyl salicylic acid, brufen or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents to be totally avoided. Caregiver should bring the patient to the hospital immediately if any of the following occurs, like no clinical improvement, deterioration around the time of defervescence, severe abdominal pain, persistent vomiting, cold and clammy extremities, lethargy or irritability or restless, along with bleeding. So in group A, what are the basic things you are going to write? That we need to control the fever with paracetamol, avoid the NSAID, brufen and acetyl salicylic, that is aspirin group of drugs, prevent dehydration by maintaining the hydration properly, encouraging oral feeds, prevent the spread of dengue in the house by adequate environmental measures, and watch out for the warning signs. So these are the basic 4 steps you have to mention in the management of this particular card. And in any case this kind of patient suffers from warning signs, then you label it as group B, and there you have to obtain a reference hematocrit before the fluid therapy, give only isotonic solutions like 0.9% saline, ringal lactate or Hartmann solution. Start off with a 5 to 7 ml per kg per hour for 1 to 2 hours, then reduce it 3 to 5 milliliter per kg per hour for 2 to 4 hours, and then reduce to 2 to 3 milliliter per kg per hour or less according to the clinical response. You have to reassess the situation if the hematocrit is improving or not for another 2 to 4 hours, and if not, continue with the same rate. But if it is worsening, the hematocrit is rising, you have to increase the fluid rate to 5 to 10 ml per kg per hour for 1 to 2 hours, and again reassess the clinical status. Give the minimum intravenous fluid volume required to maintain a good perfusion and urine output of about 0.5 milliliter per kg per hour, and intravenous fluids are usually needed for about 24 to 48 hours. And patients with warning signs should be monitored by healthcare providers until the period of risk is over. So basically you have to mention in this card that the patient belongs to group A, mention the 4 must management steps, and also mention that if there is any warning sign, that the patient has to be managed as per management protocol of group B, that is we have to admit them on the inpatient and give them adequate fluid and monitor their hematocrit and keep on reassessing their clinical status for betterment or worsening. So now coming to a totally different problem card. This is more associated with your immunization, and it is one of the most important areas of community medicine. This particular card reads that a mother has come to you with a 10-month-old child. The baby has received 2 doses of pentavalent vaccine at 1.5 months and 2.5 months respectively. But the mother has not turned up for the third dose on time. So at present, what vaccines will you give to this child? Mention the dose, route, site of each vaccine as per the National Immunization Schedule, that is NIS. And when will you advise the mother to come back for the next immunization? And what vaccines will you give in that next visit? Can read differently also. Like a 9-month-old completely unimmunized child has been brought to the immunization clinic for the first time. How will you immunize? Mention the dose, route and site of each vaccine as per the NIS, that is the National Immunization Schedule. Remember, the National Immunization Schedule is very important and each of you must learn it by heart, because it's not only important from your practical point of view, it is equally important from your theory point of view, because the examiners are usually very fond of this particular issue because this is so very pertinent to our national programs. Then when will you advise the mother to come back for the next immunization? What are the vaccines that will give you in the next visit? So it can be different scenarios regarding the immunization. So there are basic certain things you need to remember in this context. So whatever may the problem card read regarding this immunization, there are certain basic things which remains unchanged. And depending on what is given in the problem card, you have to respond accordingly. So what are things to remember in this context? All the vaccines can be given at the same session, but at different injection sites using separate sterile syringes and needles when they come after a missed dose or after a longer interval than the desired one. And it is safe and effective to give BCG, DPT, OPV and measles vaccination and vitamin A at the same time to a 9 or 10-month-old child who has never been vaccinated. So it is not that in the first go when he or she is coming to you and completely unvaccinated, you need to take it in a phasic manner. You can administer in the first opportunity all these at one go, and it is absolutely okay for the child also. And in case the child is coming in an interrupted fashion, that has had some vaccines, then due to some reasons couldn't complete the schedule, do not start the schedule all over again. No, because the child is brought late for a dose. Pick up where the schedule was left off. For example, if in this case the child has received BCG, pentavalent 1 and OPV1, returns at 10 months of age, then and received pentavalent 2 and OPV2, but after that missed the pentavalent 3 and all. So do what? You vaccinate the child with pentavalent 3 and measles, rubella, and do not start from the pentavalent 1 once again. Now let's give you the dictum regarding each of the vaccines once again. Coming to BCG. The BCG vaccination is recommended for unvaccinated TST or gram-negative older children, adolescent adults from setting with high incidence of tuberculosis or high leprosy burden, and those moving from low to high tuberculosis incidence or leprosy burden settings. Why is it important in the leprosy, high leprosy burden area? Because it is seen BCG vaccination has a very protective effect in leprosy. And just for your knowledge, TST stands for tuberculin skin test and IGRA is the interferon gamma release assay. In general, in hepatitis B vaccine, the dose for infants and children less than 15 years is half the recommended adult dose. And co-administration of hepatitis B vaccine does not interfere with the immune response to any other vaccine and vice versa. If delayed or interrupted scheduling of vaccination for children, adolescent adults, 3 doses are recommended. with the second dose administered at least 1 month after the first, and the third dose 6 months after the first dose. And remember, again I'm reiterating, if the vaccination schedule is interrupted, it is not necessary to restart the vaccine series. Just start from where you left. Same stands for the oral polio vaccine. Regarding the pentavalent vaccine, the interval between doses should be at least 4 weeks if 3 primary doses are given, and at least 8 weeks if 2 primary doses are given. Booster doses should be administered at least 6 months after the completion of the primary series. If the vaccination course has been interrupted, the schedule should be resumed without repeating the previous dose. So you can see for each of this vaccine, one universal standing is you do not restart the schedule. You just start from where you left. The children who start vaccination late but are aged under 12 months should complete the vaccination schedule, like have 3 primary doses or 2 primary doses plus a booster dose. And when a first dose is given to a child older than 12 months of age, only 1 dose is recommended. In case of measles vaccination, because many cases of measles occur in children aged more than 12 months who have not been vaccinated, routine delivery of measles containing vaccine first dose should not be limited to infants aged 9 to 12 months, and routine delivery of measles containing vaccine 2. Remember, MCV stands for measles containing vaccine. Should not be limited to infants 15 to 18 months of age. Every measles opportunity, that is whenever the children comes into contact with health services, should be taken to vaccinate all children that missed one or both the measles containing vaccine routine doses, and particularly those under 15 years of age, because they are the one more comprehensive list of the recommendations for interrupted or delayed routine immunization as per World Health Organization. Well, as you can see, in case of BCG, in case of any interruption or delay, the dose has to be given a single dose, be it less than 12 months of age or more than 12 months of age. In hepatitis B, again, you have to resume without repeating the previous doses and begin right from where we left. And even if it's less than 12 months or more than 12 months, you have to give all the 3 doses. In case of polio, in our country, we follow the bivalent OPV and the IPV. It is to be resumed without repeating previous doses, and the 4 doses to be given if less than 12 months of age, and the IPV to be given with the first dose of bivalent OPV. And same even if the child age mentioned is more than 12 months. And you must be knowing now the routine. If you like the video, find it useful, do like, share, subscribe and comment. And do remember, this is a very important from your point of view of examination. There will be a second part to this, because it's not possible to take all the parts, all the problems in one go. So I have decided to take it up in 2 or 3 parts maybe. And all the best for your examination. And do remember, the issues discussed may not be just valid for the practicals, it may be important for the theories as well, because problem card covers an area which encompasses your entire syllabus. So keep that in mind. Thank you so much.